Nicola, terrific you could join me, albeit remotely. You're turning into something like the uncrowned queen of this virtual remote world these days. I love the fact that you've turned that into a virtue with the wonderful work your foundation has done during lockdown, which I guess was a necessity, but it really came off well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
I watched the celebration concert, really inspiring and moving, the inclusiveness of it, the shared experience of it, the idea that everyone was kind of welcome, regardless of their abilities in this musical universe of ours. I guess that's the essence of what you're trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a breaking down of boundaries and barriers and age, ability, experience. You know, I think music can be enjoyed in terms of appreciation, but also in terms of participation on every single possible level. And we like putting opposites together and putting different ends of one scale or one line in the same place at the same time, and young people who are just starting out feeling like they're playing alongside people who have spent literally thousands of hours practicing something, and vice versa, that those people who are at the top end of a skill are connected to those just starting out. And what's incredible is the enjoyment and increased energy that you find is brought out of people through that shared experience. You know, people sort of become their best selves if you just continue on a kind of recurring message.
Yeah, it's interesting that we don't live in a time anymore of peripatetic music teachers going into schools just for one day a week. Or, I mean, when I was at school, I was at a comprehensive school, and we had a chap called Mr. Stocker. You see, I even remember his name. And he put a violin in my hands. And though I was never going to be a violinist or a pianist for that matter, I learned my way around the instruments, and it just opened up a practical universe for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the beauties of learning an instrument is the melding together and the forcing together in a way of such different spaces that things occupy. Like if you think of where sound exists, or where your physicality exists in relation to the instrument, or where the music itself actually exists, where the composition has come from. All of these relationships are so far-reaching if you're trying to play a piece of music that was written by somebody else. And that sort of attack on all senses and all of your kind of capacities to think and to do and to feel, it's been at the front of my mind a lot, because obviously the whole classical music world is fighting for its survival, as is the rest of the music industry. And in conversations with the department for culture and digital and sports, you know, you're forced to look at, in a slightly more comparative way, the benefits of each in isolation. And I still never come away from the belief that music has its own unique influence and power and set of circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean, I do believe, actually, maybe I'm biased, but it's the greatest of the arts. But when I started playing percussion, which I did, which was a way of being a participant, you know, when your musicality exceeds what you can do on an instrument, which was my problem. I didn't start early enough, basically. But I did take up percussion. I did participate.
It's a good way to put it, actually, when your musicality exceeds what you can do on an instrument.
Honestly, that was my biggest problem. So of course the Paganini percussion variation really hit home. That was just so exhilarating. But another thing that I kept hearing you say when I watched one or two of the sessions was be fearless. And I think that is something, it's a really interesting note to give anybody, you know, because, and that really came across in the sessions I watched.
Yeah, I think it's one of our keystones, really. And one thing that if we say 20 things or 10 things or 5 things, that idea, that concept of letting go, it
Yes.
being okay to try your hardest and for something to go wrong, and its connection to sound, the making of sound, to your physical comfort, to all the different things that you're trying to phrasing and you know the line and ebb and flow in music. It's connected to all of these things. That basic concept of how daring and free can I be?
Yeah, that letting go phrase.
Yeah.
Another thing that really chimed with me was the importance attached to improvisation. And I always feel that the best performances sound like they're being created in the playing of them, if you see what I mean. I remember,
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more.
I remember Leonard Bernstein saying that he said, I can gauge the success or otherwise of a performance by the extent to which I feel I'm composing it myself as I go along,
Yeah,
which I think is a great line as well.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
you feel that too, and it's the essence of. There's that other phrase: in the greatest discipline lies the greatest freedom.
Absolutely. I think that whole relationship that we grapple with in the macro and micro worlds of boundaries and rules, and how inextricable they are from freedom, or they should be when they are at their best. I had a really interesting dialogue with Mary Beard about this recently, where she was talking about the role of the student, and that there are so many ways to absorb and react to an overload of information, and to your, you know, education at large, and to absorb all that stuff but be in a state of constantly asking questions is not everyone's natural disposition, because it's a much scarier place to be, actually.
Indeed.
You know, and I have lived many years of my life not occupying that type of mindset at all. And now I at least know that I should, and I try to, but I have many years of playing and of learning where I was in a much more kind of subservient, unquestioning type mindset. So it's yeah.
Speaking of the spirit of improvisation, the Elgar violin concerto.
Yeah.
I'm still holding in my mind the live performance you gave with Yorovsky at Festival Hall just around the time of the recording, which was one of the last performances I heard before
Oh wow.
all this nonsense happened. And I mean, that piece, the most intimate of epics, I always think of it.
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful way of putting it. I've been trying to think of words to adequately describe it for the last month of doing interviews about it, and I have not managed. So
Well, you can
thank you.
steal that one.
The most intimate of epics.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Because it's that amalgam of the very public and the very private Elgar, and I just think you really caught that, you know, the inwardness and the outwardness of it. It's such a thrilling piece, isn't it? It really is.
It really is. I have not enough good things to say about that work. It was just a pure honor to record it.
Your relationship with Elgar goes right back to your extreme youth, I gather. Wasn't it Salut d'amour that you played when you were a little girl?
Yes, definitely. I think that was a real moment of understanding what sort of emotion and gravitas could be gleaned from playing classical music. It was a
Yeah.
real standout moment for me.
Tell me about, with regard to the Elgar. I mean, there is this contradiction in him, isn't there, between the images we have of him and the music he wrote. I remember Simon Rattle once saying if Elgar had been born in Austria, he'd have been called Mahler. Um,
Yeah.
but it is, tell me about your coming to that piece for the first time, because I'm interested in how the process of when you're learning a new piece or coming to a new piece, what are the priorities for you?
Oh, I mean, I can try to have priorities, but it's often quite a chaotic process, actually, because I mean, I'm trying to stay as open as possible. And it's funny, we were talking with some students from Royal College of Music yesterday, and I was talking to them about the moments before you come up with ideas, and I was saying it's like you're a little insect or lizard just waiting to pounce. That moment of just intense, but you're passive in terms of action, but in terms of your awareness and observation of what's around you, you're intense. And I feel like I'm in that state a lot of the time when learning any piece of music. I'm trying to let it speak to me and trying to just not get in the way,
Yeah.
because it's all, everything you need to know is there. It's just so often we complicate things and make things much more layered than they need to be. For me, I'm just constantly trying to get back to the purest form of any one thing.
Do you listen to, when you're approaching a piece for the first time, do you listen to recordings and or live performances before you start actually on the nitty gritty of the note bashing?
Yeah, I do. I'm not very purist about listening to recordings or not listening to them. I mean, I think, yes, of course you do become influenced by things, but what my inner ear tells me once I start playing, and also what my abilities and limitations physically guide and direct me through in terms of how I interpret stuff, is just so much more powerful than any kind of imitation of anything. I'm not very good imitator anyway.
Yeah. Well,
In
that's
any
clear.
in any way.
That is clear when one hears you play.
Yeah, I grew up with a lot of just phenomenal violinists, at Minuet School, but also after I left, that would just be able to do the most incredible sort of like comic imitations of other
Oh,
violinists, but also in a more serious way. A just kind of emulation of different styles, and they would also have very clear ideals of what players they loved and what styles they loved, and I, if I were to think of such a thing now, I don't have that type of esoteric ear that really it hones in on a specific sound or way of playing. I'm in a much more open state at all times. So that's all to say. I'm not fearful of listening to recordings. In a way that they will overly influence what I then do.
it's interesting the word you use, style, because that's so much of what it's about, isn't it? Being
Yeah,
able to identify that element of style and characterization about music, which takes it beyond the notes themselves. Um,
absolutely.
as a world-class international musician, of course, you've got a responsibility as well for expanding the repertoire. Um, and I'm thinking of one collaboration which I happened to write about for Gramophone. I much enjoyed, and that was your. And again, the spirit of improvisation comes up again, and that was your collaboration with Wynton Marsalis for his violin concerto. which I thought was really stimulating. I loved its storytelling, its celebration of things American. Um, did you enjoy that experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, not only was it a great experience musically, and I learnt huge amount from it, but I mean, in terms of the insight into not only a mind like that, but also
Hmm.
somebody who's had the type of experiences that he has had.
Mhm.
There are, you know, you may only get a, one, if that, experiences to be that close to that perspective. So
Did you have
I,
much
I,
input on the writing of the piece, or did you let him get on with it?
I mean, I said when things didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, I would comment on much more kind of practical things. I mean, sometimes a few things regarding shape, and a lot regarding balance. Because as much as, you know, he's been to in countless numbers of classical concerts in his life and heard a lot of violin soloists and hears string instruments up close, I think he still had so much colorfulness that he wanted to get into the score, and
Yeah.
didn't quite believe me that a violin is not going to compete with two trumpets and a trombone. It's just not going to. Like, the delicacy of the actual volume is it's just it's a losing battle, and you have to orchestrate everything relative to that sound. Otherwise, you know, you can give me the most intricate and amazing part ever, nobody's going to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. For the benefit of people who may not know, Wynton Marsalis is a spectacular trumpet player. But his experience of jazz and gospel, I thought there was a lot of Charles Ives in the piece as well. You know, that kind of collage of sounds and experiences. A pioneering kind of feel. It obviously hadn't passed him by. But are there other composers who've been, I mean, they must bang at your door to, you know, to say we'd like to write something for you, and that must be in itself a great honor or flattering.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of possible collaborations in the future, but sure ones are with two British composers, Mark Simpson and James Macmillan.
Great.
And I've obviously worked with John Tavener also in the past, Arlene Sierra, a American composer. Um, oh my goodness, I'm definitely forgetting people right now. I'm so sorry. And of course, the collaboration with Wynton. So
Yeah, there'll
yeah.
be. Um, I mean, are there any gaps in your repertoire that you feel you need to fill in urgently? I can't think of any myself, but I'm sure you have a wish list or a short list of things you might.
Yeah, I have a lot of pieces of music that I have not played and not learnt, and if I wasn't busy writing lobbying letters and putting on virtual workshops, I could have probably learnt a good few concertos during this time. But
Is there anything at the
I
top of
don't
the
know.
list right now?
I mean, I was due to play Bartok Concerto beginning of this year. That didn't happen just due to some unexpected levels of workload for the first ever Benedetti sessions that we had. And wait, no, that was the beginning of this year. Yeah,
Mm.
and there's a number of other concertos that continually kind of pop up and are discussed, but I don't know, maybe Barber Concerto.
Oh, it's
I'm
a
really coming around to that.
gorgeous piece, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, very, very intimate. It always reminds me a little bit of the Congo, which you do play, I know, but
Yeah.
heard you play it at the proms. But that kind of feeling of eavesdropping on a player's innermost thoughts, or the soloist's innermost thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I gather that you're a huge admirer, as am I, of Shostakovich. Um,
Yes.
do you play both the concertos?
I actually studied the second concerto, but I've never performed it. But that is definitely something I would love to do.
What an extraordinary. As I get older, I appreciate more the directness of that composer, but also the power of the subtext. You know, there's not much on the page. Well, there is in the solo part of the first concerto, but it's that subtext that's so powerful.
I agree. I mean, if you look at the I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you can really drive yourself crazy in trying to identify where that power comes from. And I just thought actually for the first time just now that the same notes could have been written by two different people, and that those same notes may have a different feeling.
Yeah.
Because people bring with them a weight and a spirit that is unique to them. You know, it's a fascinating thing. We were on a call yesterday. It was a debate that will be coming out on Radio 3, and there was very disparaging comments being made towards how sort of archaic our worlds are, and it's and it's just really fascinating to just think about the modernity or historic nature of any of these compositions and their relevance over time. I like, if you think of actually Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is Winton's organization, they have one of their kind of founding values is that all our music is modern, and of course it's not actually in terms of written yesterday, but in the ways that matter.
That's a very interesting discussion point. And when you were saying about identifying with Shostakovich, what it is that brings about this extraordinary power, which does speak to everybody. And when I say there's not much on the page, sometimes he achieves this huge eloquence with just one instrument, a solo bassoon or a cor anglais or something. But I think a lot of it's in the history. And, my favorite of his symphonies is the 11th Symphony, which uses only revolutionary songs as its themes. And
you and I seem to have a lot in common. That's my favorite of his symphonies.
That? Really? Yes. It's so good to hear you say that, because honestly, it has been much maligned over the years by people that should know better. And I think they miss the point.
I don't know. It's that mix of the people's voice and the straightforwardness of that, and then this endless growth into grander and grander statements, and also just like the simple use of juxtapositions of different triplet and duplet rhythms just to create such drama, and also the use of snare drum and percussion, and also those really disparate octaves, where you have instruments in unison but they're two octaves apart, so you have that really strange kind of low and high being portrayed at the same time. And
we see if someone else tried to do that, it wouldn't work. Probably it wouldn't say anything, and that's what's so extraordinary. It's because we kind of believe him.
Absolutely,
including all the coded messages that he put into his pieces. One of the things that, in someone with a life like yours, I mean, quite apart from all you're doing with the foundation, but concertizing career, I mean, how far in advance are you thinking? I mean, how far in advance do you have engagements? I mean, at the moment, they're probably welcome looking a year ahead or 2 years ahead. And do you ever get frustrated that, you know, you've programmed to play the Tchaikovsky in 2 years' time? Will you be
All the
feeling like
time.
playing the Tchaikovsky?
All the time. I absolutely hate that aspect of my life. But, you know, it's, unless I were to really break off and do something different in terms of how I manage my schedule and stuff, I mean, I could do something like that. I've never seemed to quite have enough time to be ahead of things to plan. But, you know, I don't know. No, I find that very frustrating. And to answer your question, it can be anything from a year to 2.5 years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're all hungry for a bit of reality at the moment, and I know that when I hear an orchestra for the first time after all this, I'm going to be a puddle because it's going to be
I
overwhelming.
can't even imagine it.
Yeah, yeah, it's very tough. So, Nicola, finally, what would you say to youngsters for whom the hard work of learning an instrument may go no further than their living room? I mean, this is something which has preoccupied you with your foundation. I know you've tried to get this message across that, you know, not everybody's going to be a violinist. What do you say to people to enthuse them and drive them on?
I mean, I think each individual has to work out their reason for doing what they do, and as long as you feel you have enough, you know, enjoyment and insight from that thing, then I think it's worth doing. But I think community is the external beauty of playing music and playing music all together. So that coming together for people, but equally your internal development and journey can also be so fulfilling and so substantive through music. So I think, you know, I've just said two things, one external and one internal, that don't depend on you having a career in music. You know, there are orchestras and ensembles and youth orchestras and amateur groups and all sorts of ways that you can make music collectively without it necessarily being your job. So you know, I would encourage people to consider what the priorities are.
Yeah, absolutely. In your discussions with, and we're relying on people like you to push the case for music in this crisis, with the powers that be. I mean, are you hopeful that things can be salvaged, that we'll still have 5 London orchestras, that or do you think the landscape's going to change dramatically?
It just depends on the numbers, and I hope we can preserve what we have, but we have to be really bold and think creatively during this time. We can't just play it safe. That's extremely hard to do when there's no money around, but we have to work out ways, you know.
Like this conversation.
Yes.
Well, look, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you.
And we'll meet face to face at some point.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Lovely to chat with you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.